Hey everybody, it's time for part 3. Forever Young. As children, we all loved Bill. Though of our father's generation, he had not closed the gate of childhood behind him, and we knew this instinctively. He did not talk down to us, but met us at eye level. He lived on the top of the hill beside our home. Part of the hill was an ancient fort, and at the foot of it was a fairy well. At that time, farmers' houses lacked piped water, so all drinking water was drawn by bucket from the local well, and every night, without fail, Bill brought a bucket to our house. So regular was this bucket that when calculating our fresh water requirements, we automatically counted in Bill's contribution. When he arrived after supper, his first task was to teach us our lessons. His patience was endless. Maths, catechism and Irish were all done diligently, but English was his favourite. He read profusely, and his reading took precedence over all other activities in his life. I remember one sunny day coming on him sitting on a grassy bank reading Shakespeare when every other farmer in the neighbourhood was busy saving hay. My father often despaired of Bill's farming methods and was constantly urging him to be more efficient. At that time, artificial insemination had not come to the bovine world, and some farmers kept a bull to provide the necessary service. Bill availed of our facilities for his cows. One summer morning, my father met him coming across one of our fields, trailing a rope behind him. He told my father, bringing a cow to our bull. When my father inquired as to the whereabouts of the cow, Bill turned to discover that there was nothing at the end of his rope. His thoughts, no doubt, had been on less mundane matters. Bill had a stone cowhouse with a thatched roof, mellowed to a soft, creamy white by years of sun and rain, while the cows had fashioned their own windows by gently butting their heads through the thatch. Milking time presented a pleasant picture, with each cow's head protruding through the low roof, contentedly chewing the cud and looking out over the farmyard. The yard was always spotlessly clean, though some of it, through lack of use, was covered with soft green moss, and the timber gates were weather-beaten to an almost grey-white smoothness that had a silken texture beneath your hand. An old grey donkey completed this peaceful scene. As a child, this was my retreat corner. Being the youngest of a large, noisy household, this hilltop haven often provided a welcome escape when older sisters proved too much to handle. Here, there was nobody to boss or annoy me, or to make me move any faster than I wanted to. Bill and his 2 old sisters had all the time in the world, and were delighted to see me. His 2 sisters were the bane of his life. They ran the house with clockwork efficiency, and expected him to run the farm in the same manner. But though they were of the same family, Bill was cast in a different mould to his sisters. He never believed in doing today what he could put off until tomorrow, and they pursued him relentlessly in order to make sure that nothing was put off. He devised many ploys to outmaneuver them so that he could enjoy his reading in comfort. At the far end of the haggard was Bill's rick of hay, and into this, on the side facing away from the house, he cut a large hole with the hay knife, and the fact that it faced the sun was an added bonus. In his sunny seat, Bill sat, totally oblivious to the world around him, and safe from the pursuing sisters. This plan worked for a long time, until one day the dog and the gander had a fight and chased each other around the rick of hay. Eventually, the gander got a reeling in his head and collapsed. One of the sisters, who had watched the fight, came running to investigate the condition of the gander. Bill had also watched the fight, and, thinking it hilariously funny, roared with laughter, which his sister, on hearing, traced to his retreat corner, where all his books told their own story. That was the end of that hideout. Bill lived close to nature, and if the summer was very warm, he swam nude in our river, in a pool that was clean and fresh and full of brown trout. This gentle giant of a man, he was a splendid figure standing over 6 feet, would dive from the cliff into the pool and swim like a giant fish. I found his knees very impressive. Male knees were rarely seen in rural Ireland at the time, shorts being an unknown mode of apparel. Other, more intimate details of his form did not provide the same interest, as specimens of male reproductive organs were part of the animal survival pattern of everyday life on the farm. During the long summer holidays, the plague of lessons did not exist, so Bill joined in our many games. One of our pretend games was Shop, which we played under the trees in the grove. We nailed rough planks between the trees to display our goods, empty cartons collected from the kitchen and from neighbours, which we arranged along the shelves, and we erected a makeshift counter in front. Here we traded for hours using pebbles collected from a nearby stream as currency, and though the rate of exchange posed no problem, the price of each item was open to long and complicated negotiations. It was up to the shopkeeper to sell the goods, with a convincing argument as to their value, and it was up to the customer to buy as cheaply as possible. Bill always joined the row of customers when he came after supper, and he brought new and colourful arguments to bear on the shopkeeper. Everybody wanted to be the shopkeeper, as we felt that this was the leading role, but Bill turned the tide in favour of the shopper. During the winter holidays, card playing and dancing replaced the lessons, and we were often joined by other neighbours who came visiting. Playing cards was the only occasion on which Bill could lose his temper. If anybody cheated, he put his head down like an angry bull, threw his cards on the table, and tore out the door. Being completely honest himself, he would not tolerate the slightest deviation from the straight and narrow path of right. The dancing, however, posed no problems. We all lined out around the kitchen while somebody wound up the old gramophone, and then we hopped off the stone floor, ranging in age from 7 to 70. The fairy reel, set dances and barn dances were executed with more gusto than skill, until everybody was exhausted and collapsed into the Sugon chairs that had been pushed back against the walls. My mother then put the kettle on over the open fire, and when we had recovered our breath and cooled down, we all gathered round the fire for cups of cocoa. Bill and my father had gone to school together and were friends all their lives. There existed between them a perfect understanding, though they were very different types of people. To Bill, my mother was a welcome extension to his own life, and he loved all of us unquestioningly. Indeed, in some ways, we were a three-parent family, and Bill was a plus in our lives which we took for granted. When he died quite suddenly, it came as a hard, sharp blow. He died at home, and the wake took the usual form of the time, with all the neighbours rallying round to give help and support. But for some reason, I did not go anywhere near the house. On the day of the removal, I went to the highest field in our farm, overlooking Bill's home, and from here I watched the hearse leave the house and tried to come to terms with the concept of a world without Bill. After the funeral, one of the sisters came and asked my mother if one of us children would go and stay with them for a while. It was Easter holiday time, so we were all at home. There was no great rush on the invitation, but to me the idea of trying to ease their loss of Bill was strangely appealing. So, putting my nightdress under my arm, I set out happily back through the field behind the house. Coming to the fairy well, I lay on the large mossy stone in front of it and gazed into its dark green depths. Then I ran up the steep hill, stopping to sit on all Bill's resting places, which he had made during his lifetime. I do not remember how long I spent with the sisters, but it was a whole new experience. Here, life was lived at a defined pace. The amount of water to go into the kettle was measured. The number of slices of bread needed for the tea was calculated. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was ordered and regulated. One of the sisters was in a wheelchair, and from there she ran the house down to the very last detail. To me, it was fascinating because it was such a complete contrast to our house. Not everything had changed, though. I would walk around the grey stone yard, into the white-thatched cowhouse, and rub my hand along the silken timber of the weather-beaten gates. Here was a timeless existence. Below the house was a long, narrow garden, shadowed by overhanging trees and filled with daffodils. I lay among the green and yellow rose, and gazed up into the sky through the soft green leaves. I saw Bill smiling down between the clouds, which was no great surprise, as heaven was just above them, and Bill was sure to be there. Chapter 6. The Long-Tailed Family. We children were very attached to the farm animals. Some of them were older than ourselves and very much part of our home life. Not alone were some of our animals born and reared on the farm, but so also were some of their mothers and grandmothers, and a lot of them died of old age and were buried there. Our burial ground was at the bottom of the orchard, and here the Genet, when he decided that he had had enough and lay down and died, was laid to rest. All our pals, including cats and dogs, got an official burial, and at times we marked the graves with little timber crosses. The horses held a special status on our farm. We had a red bay called Paddy, and a grey mare named Jerry, and the Genet, who, because he was the only one of his species on the farm, or indeed in the parish, was just called the Genet. He was a strange animal, smaller than a horse, bigger than a pony, and with the face of a donkey. I once heard John Dillon say on radio that the Genet did not have pride of ancestry or hope of succession. He was, in other words, a non-starter. It was a harsh pronouncement, given the Genet nothing to look back at and even less to look forward to. However, it did not seem to bother our particular fellow. Black and long-tailed, he brayed like a donkey and kicked like a divil, and if you stood too close to him, he might decide to sink his long yellow teeth into you to see if you tasted good. One of his jobs, which he did every day, was to go to the creamery. He could find his own way to town and stopped along the route at houses where my father regularly gave in gallons of milk. He was a real loner, and he did not fraternise with the horses or the pony. However, he had one thing in his favour. In the morning, when my father went to the gate of the field and whistled, he came willingly, not needing to be called a second time or coaxed on his way. Catching the horses, on the other hand, was a job that had to be done most mornings, and sometimes they were very uncooperative. Some people are reluctant to get out of bed early to face a day's work, and likewise horses are loath to be rounded up to face their day's labour. My eldest sister, Frances, was the one who loved the horses most, and she usually went out to catch them early in the morning. If she got close enough, she would swing off Paddy's mane and jump on his back for a gallop. One morning, she had on a pair of loose wooden clogs that were a fashionable necessity during the war. But when she had Paddy galloping, the clogs fell off under his belly and frightened him. He bolted. He raced up the fields like a streak of red lightning, but the effort of coming up the steep incline to the yard slowed him. He arrived in the farmyard, frothing from the mouth and covered in sweat, Frances clinging to him like a leech. She had enjoyed the challenge of holding on, while I watched with my heart in my mouth. Of all the animals that belonged on the farm, it was Paddy's death that caused most trauma in our house. He was older than I and was a horse with great class. In animals, you get as much individual variation as in humans. There are the mean, sly, stupid, intelligent and honest ones, just the same as us. Paddy was the cream of the animal world. He would neither kick nor bite and was hard-working. He was also an honest animal. If you think there is no such thing as a dishonest animal, then you have never heard of a thieving cow. Some cows always have their heads up to see if there's something better in the next field, and if there is, up and over they go to get it. We have that much in common with the cows. With horses, when they worked in pairs, there was the one who pulled hardest and did most work. There was also the horse who had no mean traits and was loved and respected by his owner. Such a horse was Paddy. At the top of our farm was a wild area known as the Glen. It was bushy and rocky, and the horses seldom went there. One spring morning, however, when my father went out to bring them in from the fields, Paddy was not with the others. After a long search, he was found lying in a deep hollow in the glen. My father's heart must have stood still when he saw him. Paddy made an effort to rise, but was not able. When the news got back to the house, we were shattered, and all made a beeline for the glen. There he lay, unable to rise, whimpering in distress because he could not follow us home. That day in school, instead of the blackboard, I saw Paddy lying in that hollow. I was completely distracted for lesson after lesson and got many slaps, but it felt as if they were hitting someone else. The clock dragged slowly around to 3. When I got home, I learned that the vet had come during the day and had pronounced that Paddy had broken his back and would have to be put down. It was like a death in the family. We all knew that my father would do the needful. A shot would be quick and merciful, but it would be so terrible for my father, who had worked with Paddy for years and loved him dearly. I went by myself to say goodbye. Going up to the glen in the dusk on that late spring evening was a sorrowful journey. There was a soft mist falling, and I felt that even the leaves were crying. I climbed down over the rocks to where Paddy lay in the grassy hollow. He whimpered when he heard me coming and turned his dark, moist eyes in my direction. Sitting beside him, I stroked his silken face with its white star. He nuzzled me gently, and, as I put my arms around him, my tears ran down his neck. He neighed softly, and looking up, I saw my father silhouetted against the darkening sky. He had his shotgun with him. It was time to go. Walking home through the soft, wet grass, I waited to hear the shot break the silence of the evening. When it did not come, I knew that my father was waiting for me to get home first. I sat on a stone to wait, and at last it came like an explosion in the quietness of the glen. After a while, My father came down the rocky path. There was no need to say anything when he saw me. I put my hand into his pocket and we walked home together. Slán.